Okay, so I'm going to continue to talk about Hinduism. I went over the first few slides last time, so I'll just quickly reiterate that because I know it was at the end of class and people weren't thinking about it. Oh, thanks. The batteries are running out. So I talked to you about the map. You guys know I love maps. The only thing better than a map is a pointer to go along with the map. Which maybe this one will work. Love maps. One thing I didn't mention last time is that I've actually traveled through a lot of India, especially this part of India. I got down about as far as here. This is a place called Goa. This was a Portuguese colony. Very interesting. And the Portuguese, I believe, were there starting around the 1500s. I went to India because I was living in Italy. After I graduated college, I went to Italy with my then girlfriend and lived in Italy for about a year and studied Italian. And at one point around Christmas, you know, Italy being a heavily Christian country, people were really going nuts with all the Christmas stuff, and it was starting to, you know, drive us batty. And we thought, we need to get out of here, you know, this is just too much for us. And we got in a plane and landed in India, in Bombay, which is now called Mumbai, and took a boat down the coast to about here, which is Goa. And that was a fun trip because we were in the hold of like an old freight boat, you know, freighter on the bottom with all the college students who were down in the hold of the boat, drinking and gambling the whole trip. And they were really friendly. We had a good time with them. And got to Goa and thought, man, we've really escaped all this Christian stuff going on, Christmas and all this stuff. And we got to Goa, and we got to Goa on Christmas morning. And we got out of the boat, and there was the full-on Christmas stuff happening like all over the place, because Goa, unbeknownst to us at the time, had been a Portuguese colony, and so all the Indian people who live there, or most of them, are Christians. And so they were celebrating Christianity, they were celebrating Christmas, but they were doing it in a somewhat Indian way. It was more like they were having a big pilgrimage and parades and festivals, and bells were going in the churches, this big thing. Like, realized, well, we can't really escape Christianity, you really can't escape your Western viewpoint, and there it is. Even though you travel very far to try to escape what the culture you've been raised in, sometimes it's very difficult. And when I talk about Taoism later, I'm going to reiterate this idea that we carry within us this sort of Judeo-Christian, Islamic, Western monotheistic worldview, and it makes it very difficult for us to understand all these Asian traditions that we're talking about, because we've got to let that worldview go. And it's really difficult to do. And even when you physically try to go to some other place to do it, you know, you end up back at the same place you started. So that was very interesting. But we had a very good time in Goa. Goa was a really cool place. Beautiful beaches, beautiful warm water to swim in, wonderful food that's cooked for you fresh on the beach. And one of the greatest memories I have is being there on a 90-degree day, sitting out at the beach, looking over the beach, and drinking Kingfisher beer, which is an Indian brand of beer. Kingfisher beer in India. You can get Kingfisher beer here in the States, but to travel from India to here, they want to preserve it, so they put glycerin in it. And glycerin's kind of a thickening agent. It doesn't quite taste the same. But if you're sitting on the beach at Goa with a cold Kingfisher on a hot day, watching the waves roll in, it really doesn't get much better than that. Really nice. And so I had a lot of fun there in Goa. Did all sorts of cool things. Rented a motorcycle, you know, drove all around the countryside. Had all sorts of, I could give you a whole dissertation on the motorcycles, which are really interesting, because the cars and the motorcycles in India does not, for a long time, I mean, they may be changing a little bit now, but they weren't allowing imports of things. They wanted to develop their own industries. So the cars and motorcycles in India are homegrown. They're made there in India. And when I was there, this was many years ago, you know, they hadn't really modernized these. When the British left, you know, in 1947, the British left, they just left all their factories in India, and the Indians just kept making British cars and motorcycles, using the factories that were there. And so, for instance, I rode a motorcycle in India that was a Royal Enfield motorcycle, which was an old British motorcycle. It was designed in like the 1930s. They hadn't updated the design hardly at all by the time I was there. And so I rode a motorcycle. It was actually almost like a genuine motorcycle from the 1930s. It had been built in these factories that had been in India probably from the 1930s. And rode it all around, and if something breaks, there's a guy in the road who will, make the part for you, get some pieces of metal, weld them together with a torch and some stuff, and, put it on the motorcycle for you. I mean, it was just absolutely amazing. You had this like stepping back in time. Now they're actually importing these Royal Enfield motorcycles into America. You can actually buy one here. I had a student a couple years ago who had one. She used to ride around on the campus with it. And I would go looking at it really longly. I said, that's the exact same motorcycle I rode around India in. So anyway, very cool place, very self-sufficient. India trying to be self-sufficient, trying to have autarky. Autarky is a word that basically means self-sufficient. And they've done that. So you don't go, and then as soon as you go to Nepal up here, everybody's driving Toyotas because they don't have that. I didn't see one Toyota the entire time I was driving around in India. Now that may have changed a little bit. You will see, if you watch Bollywood movies, you'll see some of the bad guys will be driving around in American muscle cars, but it costs a lot of money to import stuff from outside in India, so most of the stuff is sort of homegrown, and that's done by design. Okay. So anyway, India is really great, all sorts of really interesting things. I did not get to the south part, this part of the south here, down in Kerala, down in here. I did not get to Sri Lanka or to this coast, here the east coast here, or to Calcutta. My girlfriend, who's now my wife, she's been all over here. She's been down in Sri Lanka and these places. And of course, Sri Lanka, there's been a lot of political unrest there, a lot of problems. Hopefully some of that's getting resolved now. Bangladesh I've not been to. That's the one of the Muslim states, when the separation occurred. Okay. Bhutan is a really interesting country. I could talk a little about Bhutan when we get to Tibetan Buddhism. Bhutan is one of the last sort of pure Tibetan Buddhist kingdoms. You can go there. They only allow something like 300, 500 people a year into the country. They are very, it's not closed, but they're very, you just can't just get in the plane and fly there. It's supposed to be absolutely incredible. I would love to do a student trip to Bhutan if I could ever get the wherewithal to get the money and the time and go through the bureaucracy here. I did spend a lot of time in Nepal, which is absolutely magical. I did not want to leave. I went around to the American Embassy and begged people to give me some kind of a job. And I went to the American school there, and I said, I'll be a teacher, whatever. They said, oh, we just hired somebody, sorry. I said, I'll be the janitor. They said, you're in Nepal, we can hire local people to do that, be janitors and clean up the place, We couldn't pay you enough. And so I had to come back. Very reluctantly came back from Nepal. I would have stayed there. I probably would have still been living there. They've had also a lot of political unrest in the last 10, 15 years with these Maoist guerrillas who are living out in the country and sort of terrorizing things. They have been brought into the political fold now. Now they have a political party, and so that things have cooled down quite a bit. They've also had some scandals with the king, and they had one of the royal family, I think, killed somebody else, and then eventually they just said, we're going to get rid of him. And so they got rid of the king, and so now the parliament has taken over much more powers. They've become much more of a democracy now. Still a little bit of trouble, but doing much better. Yes?
There's some interesting borders up there.
Yes.
There's that exclave right next to Myanmar. There's the faded border up by Kashmir, and two missing borders in Nepal. Yeah.
So, well, Nepal, the borders are more or less okay. I think that's just a typo of the map. Nepal being between China and India is kind of between a little bit between a rock and a hard place. They generally don't try to make too much trouble with either side. This border between China, this is where it says China, this is actually Tibet. And I will talk to you about the Chinese invasion of Tibet a little further on. And I will be I'm usually not very political, you know, I don't share my political views, but I will be a little biased, you know, against the Chinese government when I talk to you. I say that because I had a student in here a few years ago who was quite offended by my criticism of the Chinese government. So I will mention that. I will be a little critical of the Chinese government. It's not that our government is perfect either, but this is sort of an ongoing slow motion genocide that's happening. It's a little hard to take, and since I know something about Tibet, and I know some Tibetans, I have a little personal knowledge of this. When I was in India and Nepal, this border was closed. You could not go across into Tibet, unfortunately, for me. I wanted to go. I got up near the border, but I couldn't go over. Now I think you can go over. Generally, when you go to Tibet, you have to go to Beijing, which would be over here somewhere. And then now there's a high-speed train, really fancy train that goes all the way through China up to the mountains, and you can actually take the train up. My Chinese friends want to go on that train. They want to do that train trip. And if we were going to take students from here, we might do that. And then you can go to Tibet. Now, Tibet opens and closes depending on what's going on politically. Right now, I believe it's open. But, you know, when there's political unrest, like, you know, right before the 2008 Olympics, you know, they closed it down. And so depending on what they're doing, they don't want you to really see what's going on up there, so they close it down. They don't let Westerners in. And then they open it back up because it's a little bit, they know they can get a lot of Western tourist dollars from people wanting to go and seeing Tibetan culture. So it's sort of a mixed bag. I've had mixed feelings about wanting to go. And then I talked to a Tibetan monk, a very young guy, and he encouraged me to go. He said, you should just go and see for yourself. He said, it's okay. These borders up here I mentioned before are some of the most disputed borders ever. There's constant skirmishes going on here. It's not any sort of open war kind of thing, but they're constantly skirmishing about these borders. And then on the other side over here, this is Kashmir. I actually did spend time up here in Kashmir. You cannot really go there now. It's very difficult for you to go. Even when I went, again, which is many, many years ago, going up there was a little dicey. You know, there were armed military people wandering around with, you know, AK-47s walking around the street patrolling things. And the reason for this is because Kashmir, this is a large Muslim population up here, and a lot of the people who are in India feel more alliance with Pakistan, and they really, you know, they're not necessarily friendly toward the Hindu majority Indian government. And so there's some tension there. And it's been there for a long time, and it's a beautiful, beautiful place. And you know, we stayed up there in Srinagar in a houseboat, which is on a lake, and they have these houseboat sort of hotels. You stay in the lake. But what happens is the Muslim families are pretty traditional, and they keep the sort of, you only will see the men folk. They keep the women behind and, you know, back, and you go out to dinner or whatever. It's men serving you. It's very traditional. And it's a little closed off. And then we had met a guy, a trader, a Muslim trader, when we were in Goa. And so he said, if you're in Srinagar, come and visit my family. And so we went to visit him, and had a really good time there. It was really interesting when they found out that my family background was Muslim. My dad's Turkish. Their attitude toward me really changed. You know, it wasn't like, oh, you're just some American. You know, it was, oh, you're one of us. In fact, you look a little like my cousin, they would tell me. And they gave me a name. They started calling me the name of the cousin who supposedly looked like me. And so then they brought us back into the family room in the house, and we actually got to meet the women in the family, which was a great honor. And we got to do two things: meet the women in the family, which was a big honor, and then we also got to smoke out of the hookah. And the hookah was not, we did not smoke hash, you know, because that wasn't something they did. We smoked this tobacco that basically when you smoked it, it was like somebody taking a hammer and hitting you in the head with it. It was the strongest tobacco I ever had. And I started to cough, and they all started laughing. I thought that was the funniest thing they'd ever seen. But very interesting place, very beautiful, very cold in the winter. We were actually up there in the wintertime. It was very cold. Lot of tension here at this border with Pakistan. And always trouble brewing here, and the local population is pretty sympathetic to the Pakistani side. And so lots of potential problem there, lots of potential problem between these two countries. This is a place that potentially could be a flashpoint for a war between these two nuclear powers. And so again, I think I mentioned this. This is, if there was going to be a nuclear war starting somewhere, this is a likely place it could start, unfortunately. So that's India. Just tell you a little bit about my time there. I really enjoyed being there. I've always wanted to go back, and if I could encourage you to travel someplace that was really different and get you out of your normal mindset, I would encourage you very strongly to go to India. Very, very interesting place. Now, it used to be if you're European, you could actually drive down. I knew Europeans who'd driven down. But now that with all the wars and stuff in Afghanistan and Iraq and Iran being closed, at least to Americans pretty much, it's a lot more difficult. So it's easier to fly there. When I was there were a lot of Europeans, especially young people, hippies, coming down from Europe to hang out in India because the hash was really cheap and they could just hang out on the beach and be stoned all the time. And the Indians did not like them. They especially loathed the French. Not saying anything against the French, but for some reason, the French seemed to the Indian people when I was there, they seemed much more arrogant and sort of demanding, and so they just loathed the French. These French people, we hate them. They liked the Germans a lot. They didn't get too many Americans. It was very interesting to be American there, and didn't see too many Americans. A lot of Australians. By the way, if you start traveling in Asia, you'll find lots of Australians. Australians love to travel, and they're great when you meet them. You're out on the road, you haven't met anybody from America, especially you haven't met anybody from California, and you run into some Australians, it's like a homecoming. It's like they're so much like Californians because they live on the coast. They've got surf. They've got this very similar kind of culture, at least in some parts of Australia that we have. And so you meet them, it's like, and they speak English, and they got these wonderful accents. And so you meet Australians when you travel too, quite a bit. We met a lot of Australians in India and Nepal. All right. 1 out of 6 people on the earth is Hindu. I mentioned this, practiced by 80% of the population in India, Nepal, and Bali, of all places. In Indonesia, used to have a larger Hindu population. Now Indonesia is mostly Muslim and is the fastest growing Muslim population on the planet. Okay? But there's still some Hindus down in places like Bali. About over 1 million Hindu people in the United States, so Hinduism is really a global religion. I mentioned in these places, Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, these are the early civilizations along the Indus River, and the word Indus River became related to this word Hindu, because in Sanskrit it's called Sindhu, and then this gets taken by the Arabs, who call it Al-Hindu. And then later on, the British start calling anybody who lives in India, because they weren't too particular about these people who they were ruling over. They just called them all Hindus. And that was sort of the term the British had for them. But later on, this actually gets adapted by these high caste Brahmins, and it becomes a national identity for Indians to be Hindu. Okay, so this idea of Hindu, what is a Hindu? The word Hindu, or the designation Hindu, is a relatively modern designation. Okay, people back thousands of years ago didn't call themselves Hindus, even though they were practicing a religion that was very same, practicing a belief system was very similar. So this idea that we're now calling these people Hindu is a relatively modern thing. All right, so I'll try to define Hinduism for you. This is very difficult because Hinduism is a really vast religion that tends to be kind of all-encompassing, and as soon as you say this is how all Hindus are, you will find you will likely find an exception to the rule. Okay, so I want to point that out because that, to me, is one of the great strengths of Hinduism, that it really is very encompassing. That almost any sort of practice could fall under under some type of Hinduism. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to you about sort of the average Hindu. Okay, give you the sort of average. But that's not to say that you won't find Hindus who are very different. Okay, and I'll try to give you some examples of that. Hindus worship or try to relate to some sort of supreme reality, some sort of idea that, again, remember I talked about the Freudian and the Jungian, especially the Jungian unconscious. that there's this idea that there's this reality that we can't quite directly access, but is more truer, or contains a lot more stuff than a sort of everyday reality. This is the same kind of idea in Hinduism. And the supreme reality can be called by many names. It can be personified into a god. It can be personified into gods and goddesses. It teaches that all individuals, all souls, can ultimately realize salvation. All souls can have an experience of the supreme reality and be saved from this cycle of life and death that we're all on now. Because we're in this world, we're in this wheel, we're in this reality that is called samsara. And samsara is a reality that is full of suffering. There's a lot of suffering in being a human being. You're going to be born, you're going to go through all sorts of things, you're going to die, you got to keep going around and around and around this wheel over and over and over again. And eventually, though, you can get off this and become at one with this supreme reality. And in Hinduism, that is called moksha. And I have a slide with that on it later. There is no eternal hell. There is no damnation. There's an acceptance of all genuine spiritual paths as perfectly fine. Okay? And you find all sorts of Hindu beliefs, from pure monotheism to basically to pantheism, many gods, and even atheism. Okay, that's just energy out in the universe. It's just prana out there, and we turn it into these gods. But there's really no such thing as a real God. You'll find Hindus who say that. Okay. Each person, each soul is free to find their own way, and there's lots of different ways you can reach the supreme reality: devotion, austerity, meditation, selfless service. There's stress on temple worship, reading scriptures, and a guru-disciple tradition. There are festivals, pilgrimages, chanting of holy hymns, and home worship. And you'll find all these things. These are the main things that people do as Hindu practice. As far as the rules of Hinduism, again, there's no one pope or church that says here are the rules for everybody. But in general, love, trying to love other people, nonviolence, good conduct, and the law of the Dharma. The Dharma is essentially the religious rules define the Hindu path. Hindus believe that soul reincarnates until all karma is resolved and the realization of the supreme reality is attained. I'll talk to you about karma in a minute. It's a mystical religion, and the idea here is that you yourself as an individual have to have an experience of the supreme reality on your own. You can't have somebody do this for you. You actually have to participate. And this comes from a website, by the way, called How to Become a Better Hindu, and I've adapted it a little bit. Okay, so let's talk about some of the, I don't know what you call it, philosophy of Hinduism, cosmology of Hinduism. I'm not going to go into the detailed cosmology because it would take too much time. I'll give you some overview of that. There are some really good, if you really want to get into this stuff, there's some really good videos out on YouTube. If we had enough time today, I could show you some of these, but I'll probably skip over and let you look for those yourself. But what I want to talk about today a little bit is time, Hindu conceptions of time. And this is interesting because this is a very different conception that we have here in the West. In the West, we tend to view time as very linear. And especially now in the modern world, this seems to be even more extent. And possibly that is because, in the Western world, especially places like the United States, we have wonderful inventions like assembly lines. You all know about this. Henry Ford was really famous for, I don't think he invented the assembly line, but he was famous for really using it and building cars back in the day. And you know how assembly line works, right? You start out with a bunch of parts over here. I put these together, I make some wheels. I go over here, I make some axles. I go over here, I attach the wheel to the axle. I make a chassis here, I put the wheel and the axle on the chassis. I add some other wheels and chassis. I go down here, I add an engine. I go down here, I add the body of the car. I paint it over here. And over here, I add the windows. I add the interior to the car. I add the gas tank. I add the brakes. Car's done, rolls off the assembly line, and goes to the dealer and gets sold, right? That's how the assembly line works. You guys all know that because you're Westerners and you live in the West, and we do lots of things like that. If you go to Subway and buy a sandwich, you will see them do a little mini version of the assembly line. Here's the bread, we'll put the stuff on here, put the stuff on here, it goes down, and they fix it. We have this kind of thing ingrained in our mindset, this assembly line version of time. Your life is a little bit like assembly line. You're born, your parents raise you, you go through developmental stage number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, Freudian and Piagetian developmental stages kind of simultaneously. You go to education, you get your head stuffed full of all sorts of stuff. You know, you go to college, you get your head stuffed full of stuff. You get out of college, you get a job, you get married, you have kids. Kids grow up, leave, you grow old, go in the old folks' home, you get sick, and then you die. Nice linear lifetime, right? This is what we have to look forward to. And so we tend to see time this way. We tend to see time this way. And we even find this in our scientific conceptions of reality. This Big Bang blew up, a bunch of stuff got ejected out into what is now the universe, a bunch of hot gas swirling around, and gravity pulls it all together, it forms planets. The planets do certain things. You know, water develops on Earth, you know, blah, 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 blah. Human beings finally evolve way over here. Planets keep going on, they keep aging, and then, you know, what's projected, 2 billion years from now or something, the sun will explode and everything will be done, and we'll, you know, that'll be it for humans, right? So again, even our scientific conception of time have this sort of linearity to it. This is very, very alien to Hinduism. Hinduism does not have this sort of linearity to it. Underlying Hindu thought is this idea that time is cyclical. Time is cyclical. And this cyclical time is very interesting. Because once you take a line and you turn it in on itself in a circle, then all sorts of interesting things happen to it, such as points on the circle can relate to each other in certain ways. Now, I won't get into a lot of details about that, but that becomes very interesting. The thing we need to think about, as far as this class is concerned, the simple view of it, is that time is no longer a linear thing. It doesn't have a beginning and an end. It has a beginning, it has sort of an end point, and then it has a beginning again. Okay? So time is cyclical, goes around and around and around. Even though some of the ages of the time are so long that you may think you're on a straight line. But, you know, it's like I look out over the horizon here to the Channel Islands. I think that Channel Island is a direct line from Ventura Harbor, right? Just take a straight line and go out there. What I'm not seeing is the subtle curvature of the Earth, right? I can look out here and I can see the Channel Islands. I cannot look out here and see Japan, even with a pair of binoculars. Why? Because the Earth curves and Japan is on the other side over here, over the curvature of the Earth, right? So I can't make a direct line. And somehow Hindu time is a little bit like that. You have these vast ages of time that appear to be linear because they're just so vast. But in actuality, they are also cyclical. That make sense? So in Hinduism, these ages, these great ages, are called yugas. And we talk about the Maha Yugas. Maha means great. The Maha Yugas. Maha Yugas, great. And we'll see Maha coming up in a number of other words as well. But Maha means great in Sanskrit. And time itself is called Kala, and is a manifestation, supposedly in some versions, as a manifestation of Ishwara, who was one of the older Hindu gods. There are a bunch of Hindu gods out there, literally hundreds of them, and some are older and not much paid attention to nowadays, and some are the more popular sort of current ones. And I'll talk to you about the current ones in more detail later, but there's a number of ones out there, and Ishwara is one of those. Because time is on a circle, past, present, and future can exist simultaneously. In other words, everything sort of exists at the same time, but once this stuff gets manifested out in our samsaric reality, it becomes a cycle. And the word for this is kala chakra. Chakra means wheel and kala means time. So wheel of time, literally. This creates the illusion of life and death, and this illusion is also responsible for this sort of assembly line view of birth, up through old age and death. When we overcome this conception, or possibly you could call it a misconception, of time being linear, we actually become immortal because we no longer see a distinction between life and death, birth and old age, those kinds of things. These become dualities which disappear. And this, of course, leads to this ideas like reincarnation, which I'm going to talk to you in more detail about. Now, according to Hinduism, there are 4 great epochs of time, 4 great yugas. Each age is different from the others. And the first, for instance, in our current time, the first 3 yugas are already passed, and we are supposedly now in the 4th one. And these yugas are the Sata Yuga, it's the golden age of truth, the Treta Yuga, the silver age, the Dwapara Yuga, the 3rd great age, and then finally the Kali Yuga, the darker iron age, which we are currently in. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about these. You can read about these. But basically the idea is in the Sata Yuga, people live, I can't remember what it is, something like 100,000 years, and there's no vice. People are very pure. They're very good. And then what happens is over time, these ages are really vast. I should have written it down. I'll bring it in next time, the time periods. The time period of the Sata Yuga is very vast. All the time periods are in multiples of 108. And that's very interesting because that's the number of the old Hindu gods, and that's also the number of beads you see in a mala. And so you'll see a lot of stuff in a lot of this 108 comes up again and again and again. In Hinduism and in Buddhism, by the way, because Buddhism also adopts that 108 thing. I should have written down because I can never remember the numbers. Yeah, people live for a long time in the Sata Yuga, and then what happens is by the time you get to the second one, people now become slightly a little bit more decadent. In the Sata Yuga, people don't really have to do anything to be sort of enlightened. It just comes naturally that it's very pure. The Treta Yuga, people start to become a little more decadent. People only live like, 10,000 years or something like that. And they have to start to do things like meditate to get enlightened. And then we get to the Dwapara Yuga, and the same idea, people live like 1,000 years, but there's more decadence. And then by the time you get to the Kali Yuga, people are really decadent, and it's really difficult for them to do any sort of spiritual practice. And so the only one that really works in the Kali Yuga, the best one for us in this time, supposedly, is to chant the name of God. And there's certain mantras that are kind of sort of universal mantras that chant the name of God. And the typical one that I've seen that's recommended is the Hare Krishna mantra. Okay. Yeah. Comment?
Yeah. If all time exists simultaneously, how did we pass other ages? If they're all at the same, if they're all
they exist in this. Well, so this is the hard part to get. Okay. If I could explain this in metaphor, because this is what the Hindus do. So Vishnu, great god Vishnu, what we're going to talk about later on, is lounging on a couch, and out of his navel springs a lotus, and in that lotus is Brahma. And this is sort of representing of the undifferentiated time. That is the mind of God, and you really can't, as a human being, know that. It's a little like the story of Job in the Bible. You really don't know what God is thinking, right? It's the undifferentiated time. Everything is potential. Everything can happen at the same time. All the potential is there. It's ready to happen. you know, it's all existing simultaneously. And then what happens is Brahma opens his eyes. And when he opens his eyes, the world cycle starts. The cycle of these things starts. And when he closes his eyes, these stop, opens his eyes, they start over again. Okay? And so again, what happens is, so the idea here is that when that undifferentiated stuff manifests in our samsaric plane of reality, that's when we get this sort of sense of beginning in, but it's a circular beginning in, beginning in, beginning in, over and over and over again. Okay? So it comes from this undifferentiated place. You can think of it in Western physics. It's very similar to the Big Bang, right? Very similar to the Big Bang. You know, our universe comes into existence. Before that, it was just whatever, a potential mass of energy, you know, a singular point. It comes into existence at one point. And when it comes into existence, then all this stuff starts up again. Okay? The only difference is in Hinduism, when it goes out of existence, it'll go back and start over again, right? And some people have actually compared this to the Big Bang in modern physics too. It's really quite interesting. There are some very interesting parallels. For instance, if you take all these ages and you add them all up together, the amount of time for going through one of these cycles seems to be about how old we think the universe is.
Of all ages? Or
yeah, all four of these. You go through all four of these, it seems to be, oh, that's about how long it's been, you know, since the Big Bang. Of course, we're not finished yet. So, you know, and then I've seen other things that say, well, these are about half the age. So there's various calculations out there, but they're not like way, I mean, they're in the ballpark. That's a very interesting kind of thing. So we are supposedly now in the Kali Yuga, which is a very decadent age. There's a lot of vice. And because of this, there's really lack of spiritual practice. We only live about 100 years, if we're lucky. Lack of spiritual practice. And, you know, some people will say, well, we're getting down to the end of the Kali Yuga, things are getting really bad, and so, you know, the big thing is going to come, and we're going to start the cycle over again. Who knows? Okay, and you can go online, you can find all sorts of people making calculations about this. I don't know. But this is the idea. Okay. All right, I'll move on. There is no single historical founder of Hinduism, unlike Buddhism, for instance. There's no unified code of faith, no central authority, no bureaucratic structure. This makes Hinduism different from practically all other religions, both East and West. Perhaps in some way, you know, maybe similar to some kinds of Taoism. Taoism doesn't have a central figure, but Taoism has also been a court religion, and at one point did have people sort of running things. So really, Hinduism is really quite different in this way. It makes it different than other religions. The definitions of boundaries of who are considered Hindus is pretty vague. There's a lot of large differences between people who call themselves Hindu. Very big differences. So again, I'm going to be talking to you about what the sort of average is. And in this average, there are sort of four pivotal beliefs that Hindus have. I'll talk about these: karma, reincarnation, dharma, and a belief in some sort of all-pervasive, and I don't like to use the word divinity because it's too godlike, but I would say some all-pervasive reality, which can be theistic, pantheistic, non-theistic, agnostic, atheistic, any of the above. But typical Hindu, it is going to be pantheistic. Okay? Most typical. You also find very monotheistic Hindus. Okay? Anybody ever been down in the airport? Years ago, used to find them at the airport, these Hare Krishna guys, be chanting, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Right? So that's the mantra you want to do for Kali Yuga. They would chant this. They were a group of Hindus who basically came over here and started recruiting Westerners. And back when I was in college, they would be in all the college campuses, and they would put on free meals and entice you into becoming one of them. You know, had a little bit of a cult-like thing. I don't want to say they were a cult, but had a little bit of that going on. I actually had a guy I knew from college who became a Hare Krishna, and bottom of the whole thing. He ended up being head of like some region of Hare Krishna somewhere. But they were around, and they are a branch of of Hinduism that is very monotheistic, almost like Christianity, where Vishnu is God and Krishna is like Jesus. I'm oversimplifying, but that's kind of how they work. And they're still around, and there's still lots of Hindus who have a tendency toward monotheism. But then there's plenty out there who are pantheistic, and that's fine too. And of the pantheistic ones, typically you may acknowledge all the other gods, but you might find one that you have a specific attraction to, that you like. And I'll talk to you about which ones are popular and which ones are unpopular a little bit later on. 9 beliefs of Hinduism, again adapted from this website. And again, think of averages here. Lots of exceptions to these. Number 1, Hindus believe in the divinity of the Vedas. And the Vedas are one of the world's most oldest written religious scriptures. And these are primordial hymns of God's word and the bedrock of sort of the rules of what Hindus do sort of come out of those. Now, a lot of Hindus won't read the Vedas. Some of them can be pretty boring, but people will revere them. They will also not believe that these are the literal word of God. Unlike some Bible literalists, most Hindus do not believe the Vedas are the literal word of God, but these are, the inspired by God and transliterated by human beings. Okay. Second, we've already talked about, Hindus believe in some sort of all-pervasive supreme reality. This can be personified into a god or gods, and who is both immanent and transcendent. What does that mean, immanent and transcendent? Transcendent means something that you aspire to get in contact with, and immanent means something that is in the world with you today. It's here with you. So there's this other reality that's out there that you could transcend and get to, but that reality also is here with you today, underlying everything in this sort of normal reality. Good. It starts to think, be a little bit like the collective unconscious that way. So it's here, it's also transcendent. Hindus believe that the universe undergoes endless cycles of creation, preservation, and dissolution. We talked a little bit about that. Hindus believe in karma. And karma is the law of cause and effect, by which each individual creates his own destiny by his thoughts, words, and deeds. And karma means nothing more, the literal translation of karma is action. It just means doing stuff. Okay? You do something, there's a result of that. Okay? The result can be negative, the result can be positive, but when you do stuff, there's a result. And if you do, the idea here, underlying here, is if you do more negative stuff, you make more unresolved stuff. You make actions that need to be resolved. If you do positive things, then your actions will resolve naturally and you'll have less problems. This is like in your personal life. Everybody in here, you know that person, right? Who creates drama. Anybody have any friends who are drama creators? Right? They create drama. They are making more karma. And what does making that karma do for them? Does it help them, make them happier? You ever see anybody who's a real drama king or queen be a really happy person? No. It makes them miserable. Right? What about people who are the opposite of that? People who make less drama?
They're so happy.
They're much happier, right? And again, if you go look at like Buddhist monks who've been meditating, which is the thing you can do that makes the least amount of karma, you find the pleasure centers of their brain that are permanently lit up. So we even have like confirmation from neuroscience of this, right? So this is the idea. This is the idea underlying good and bad karma. Bad actions make more karma. They make more unresolved stuff. They make more drama, more trouble. Good actions tend to resolve previous actions. They tend to resolve karma. Okay? To make people happier, and the karma gets less until you resolve it all, and then you are freed from the cycle of existence. That's sort of the rough way to put it. Okay? I don't want to be too mystical about karma. You can talk about it in a very mystical way. And people do that. The problem with that is it makes it harder to understand and it's not very useful. And I'm going to go into a lot of detail about karma when we talk about Buddhism. But the Buddhist conception of karma and the Hindu conception of karma come from the same places. They're fundamentally very, very similar, but there are some very, very important differences. Okay? Very important differences that I'll get to when we talk about Buddhism. It's not really, you don't really see in Hinduism. And this is the reform that Buddhism, to some degree, makes from Hinduism. Buddhism grows out of Hinduism and reforms some of these ideas a little bit. And some of them are pretty subtle and some are less than subtle. And I'll talk about that. I'll go into a lot of detail and talk about the Buddhist idea of karma. But I want to give you the Hindu idea now, which is a little bit, in a way, I don't want to say simpler, but a little less complicated because of who is it in Hinduism that is making the karma. And in Hinduism, the entity that's making the karma is called the Atman. Atman means similar to the Western idea of the soul. It is a permanent entity, a permanent ego, a permanent sense of self, a permanent individual identity that reincarnates from life to life to life. And I'll talk about that more in a minute. Okay, Hindus believe that this soul, this Atman, reincarnates through many births until the karmas have been resolved. When the karma is resolved, the person achieves moksha, spiritual knowledge and liberation from the cycle of rebirth. And eventually, most Hindus believe that eventually every single soul, every single Atman will achieve moksha. It's just a matter of time and going through these long periods of yugas, many, many times. But eventually, everybody's going to get enlightened. It's just going to take time. So be patient. So one of the things that's built into Hinduism, and you see this when you hang out in places like India, that people tend to have, sometimes they tend to be a little more patient, again, like the average, than your Western person. Because, relax, you're going to get there eventually. We're going to go at different speeds, different rates, but everybody's eventually going to get there. So, you don't need to be in quite as much of a hurry as we think we do. Again, this is going to change when we get to Buddhism, some kinds of Buddhism. We're going to see certain kinds of Buddhists are in a big hurry. Other ones, not so much. Okay? But Hindus, take your time. You're going to recycle, you're going to reincarnate many times, you're going to resolve all these karmas, and then eventually you're going to get off the cycle. Okay, Hindus believe that divine beings exist in unseen worlds. This is another way of saying that Hindus also believe in sort of a multi-dimensional universe. I think it's a little almost like Baskin-Robbins. Baskin-Robbins has 32 flavors of ice cream, and I believe Hindus have 31 different dimensions that beings can live in or be manifested in, of which we're sort of in one. So again, there's a very elaborate cosmology. There's a which includes an astrological system and all sorts of things, and also this sort of multi-dimensional world. Now, do most Hindus sort of engage in this multi-dimensional world? Is it meaningful in their daily practice, this kind of thing? I would say probably not. But if you really want to delve into it, if you're going to become a Brahmin priest, then you're going to go study Vedic cosmology, and you're going to learn all these things. Some of this cosmology comes into Buddhism later on. We're going to talk about the Tibetan Buddhists adopted a lot of this Vedic cosmology. We'll see it there. Buddhists also boiled down some of it. We'll go from 31 to 6. And we'll talk a little about that later on. Hindus believe that a spiritually awakened master, or a Satguru, is essential to know the transcendent, the absolute, in other words, to achieve moksha. And you also need personal discipline, good conduct, purification, pilgrimage, self-inquiry, and meditation. In other words, Hindus believe that you need a spiritual teacher. A spiritual teacher would be very helpful to you. And the spiritual teacher is called a guru, and the student is called a chela. So there's a guru-chela relationship where the spiritual teacher guides you and helps you find what will be your way to moksha. Hindus believe that all life is sacred, to be loved and revered, and therefore they practice ahimsa. Ahimsa is essentially non-injury to other beings. Okay? Now, I was under the impression that this was something that was very ancient and been around for thousands and thousands of years. And one time I was asked to give a lecture on Buddhism to a Hindu congregation. And afterward, a gentleman came up to me and said, you know, this idea of ahimsa that the Buddhists have, the same idea, because, you know, we didn't have that in Hinduism until Buddhism came along. Buddhists came along and they really kind of jacked this idea up, and the Hindus felt like they had to sort of follow along and get it together and start becoming vegetarian and do these things. And before that, that wasn't the case. And this is true when you look at even things like eating cows. That if you go back 200, 250 years, you'll find that Hindus ate meat and ate cows and things like that. So this idea of ahimsa, as far as I know, and again, no insult to anybody who's a Hindu, no insult intended, but this is an idea that's relatively, it's been around for a while, but the elevation of it to a rule is relatively new. Past few hundred years in a religion that's been around for 5,000 years or so. So relatively new. Okay? I don't know if this guy was right, if it really gets sort of punched up after Buddhism comes along, but that's what he told me. And there are lots of exceptions to this. And the big exception is, I can tell you from my own personal experience, if we go back, here, I'm liking this computer. We go back up here to our map. I was in Nepal, right around in here, outside of Kathmandu, somewhere in here, up in the mountains, on the way to Everest. I didn't go to Everest, but I went on the way, just outside. There's a temple that I went to, and at the bottom temple, there's two temples in this complex. The bottom temple was a Kali temple, and the top temple was Parvati. I'm going to talk to you about Parvati and Kali a little bit. Parvati is the wife of Shiva, the consort of Shiva, who also manifests in a peaceful form as Parvati and then manifests in a wrathful form as Kali. And the Kali temple was on the bottom. We went to the Kali temple. I walked into the temple, and what's the first thing I see going on? Brahmin priests taking goats. They have a sharp, curved knife. They take the goat. They pull the head back of the goat. They take the knife, and in one swoop, slit the throat of the goat. Blood spurting out everywhere, all over the place. The goat's body is handed over to some people. They chop it up, literally right there on the spot, throw it into a big pot, and make goat stew. And a big pot of goat stew making, blood everywhere. The moms take the little kids, take their hands, dip it in the fresh, warm, bubbling goat's blood, take the hands, go over to the statue on the wall relief statue of Kali, and the little kids smear the blood on the Kali statue for good luck. And the moms are doing this with the little kids. Kids are smearing the blood on the statue. And then everybody goes and has delicious goat stew. It was really quite delicious. And that is a Kali temple. That is a Hindu temple. Well, Hindus are supposed to be vegetarian. No. I saw it firsthand. I ate the goat stew. I saw the goat getting, right there in front of me. It was a Hindu temple. And there are Brahmin priests sitting there with incense going, chanting, saying mantras, chanting scriptures, full-on Hindu stuff with goat sacrifice. Oh, that blew my mind. And then you walk to the temple upstairs, and it's a Parvati temple. Everybody's vegetarian. There's no goats being sacrificed. You go in the temple, you get a red dot in your forehead, you hang out, you chant, with Shiva chanting and stuff. Vegetarian, or standard Hindu practice. So right in the same complex, you have both of those things going on. So again, there are exceptions to everything. Exceptions to everything. Okay? But you will find in general that again, the average is that most Hindus tend to be vegetarian. So if you go out to the temple here and you go for lunch on Saturday, you're not going to get goat stew, you're going to get delicious vegetarian food. And the last one is that Hindus believe that no particular religion is really better than the other one. If you're a Christian, that's perfectly good. You're a Muslim, that's perfectly good. You're a Buddhist, that's perfectly good. They're all good. That all genuine religious paths lead to good things at the end. Okay? Which is, again, very, very, very different than a lot of other religions that will tell you their way is the only way. Okay, let's talk a little bit about some of the central ideas. And I made you a nice diagram here. And you can think of this being, sort of our reality as human beings, if you want. We, as humans, have this thing called an Atman, soul. And the direct translation of Atman is performer of the action which bears fruit. In other words, you are the entity that experiences the karma. Right? You're the entity that experiences the karma. And karma is what drives this wheel around and around and around. Okay? Drives this wheel around and around and around. Okay? So again, we can talk a little bit about karma. I go up to you. Let's say I go up to you, and for whatever reason, I'm really pissed off. Somebody cut me off on the road getting to work here. I'm really pissed off, so I just see you, for whatever reason, I didn't like it, so I just slug you in the face. Oh, right? Action. Negative action. Action, right? You don't like that. You don't like your professor slugging you in the face. So what you do, you say, that rat bastard professor slugged me in the face for no good reason. I know he's tenured, but he's not allowed to do that. So you go to the president of the university, and you register a complaint, or you go to the police and you say I've been assaulted by this professor, and they come and they get me, and now what happens to me? All sorts of a series of bad things. First I get arrested, then you sue me, then maybe I lose my job, all sorts of stuff. So my action bears a fruit. Negative action bears negative fruit, and I'll say negative action makes more negative actions, right? Negative actions makes more negative actions. Okay? Action, reaction. Almost like Newton's second law, right? For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Except in karma, we can change that a little bit. For every action, for negative karma, for every negative action, there's probably greater than equal reaction. Okay? My negative karma breeds more bad karma. Okay? Jail, lose my job, I'm going to lose my house, my wife's going to divorce me, et cetera, lose custody of my kid, on down the line. All these negative actions are going to happen, right? Let's talk about a positive action. Instead of me slugging you, let's say I come to class today and I've just gone through all the grades and I saw you took the test and you got a perfect score. And I'm really happy about that. So what I do is I'm like, wow, she got a perfect score. You know what? Hey, so happy you got a perfect score. Here's a $100 bill for you. Have fun, right? Now, that's my action. Now, from that action, what's the reaction? What's going to happen from that? What's my karma from that? Well, I get to feel good about myself. I helped this poor student. She's going to go to the president and say, that Professor Vulcan, he's the nicest guy. He gave me $100 for doing really well in the test. And the president's going to come to me and say, oh, that's really great. You did a really nice thing. That was really good. I'm really going to appreciate you. I get lots of appreciation. I get to feel good about myself. Is that going to produce more drama or less drama?
Less.
Oh, less drama, right? I made people happy. Make people happy, then they just want to make other people happy, right? President's really happy because she's got nice professors who work for her. I'm happy because I got to do a nice thing. Maybe your parents are rich and they hear about this and they decide to donate $1 million to the university. I don't know, but good things happen. good things happen. But it's not like breeding drama, right? Not breeding negativity. It's putting the seed in for more good things. Maybe another professor hears about that, going, I'd really try to do that and inspire my students. And so they give out a $100 bill. By the way, I wish I had $100 bills to give you for being good students. So that's the idea of positive karma. Okay? And again, the more positive karma you do, you make other people happy, they do good things for other people, and eventually we're all doing positive things, and then all the drama resolves and we can become enlightened. We can get off this wheel. We don't have to reincarnate anymore. Okay? We just go into moksha. It's a different reality. Okay? Does that make sense? So that's what karma is about. Okay? So one thing you need to do is practice good karma. Yes?
Couldn't positive actions create a lot of negative reactions?
Generally,
Like something like that, like giving out a $100 bill and then someone perceiving it as like unfairness or something?
so here's the deal where I am not an expert on Hinduism. I can tell you the Buddhist perspective of that. And I'll talk about that. But the idea is that no, the positive actions will generate good actions. If you do something good, eventually, maybe not right away, good things will come of it. If the positive and the negative are mixed up together, let's say, for instance, I know her dad is rich, and I know that I'm going for a grant, and he can give money to the university, and I know I can get in with the president if I do something nice. I want the president to like me because there's some gain I want to get. So I'm giving her $100, but my intention is tinged with not necessarily negative, but it's tinged with sort of greed or selfishness. Then then the actions that come from my act will not be as positive. And maybe may have some negative things. Maybe the other students get jealous. I want $100 too, right? And I get getting in trouble. So part of it has to do with the purity of my intentions. And again, if I'm a Hindu and I'm following these things, and I'm open to, the pure intentions, I'm doing things from a pure-hearted place, then there will be positive karma come from the positive goods. The problem is we don't always know our minds. And so sometimes we don't know our intentions. We may be unconscious. Like knowing her dad is rich and trying to curry favor, that's I know that. But I also may not know. I may give $100. It may be coming from a place where I'm neurotic. I feel like I need to give her $100 because I don't like myself or something, right? So that also can cause a mixture, right? And unfortunately, I'm oversimplifying karma here. Because karma is always a little bit of a mixture of good and bad. Because we're imperfect human beings. We can't know ourselves. We don't know ourselves perfectly. I don't give her $100. Generally, most of that is good. A little bit of that is me wanting to feel good about myself. There's a little selfishness there, me giving her $100. Or maybe you saying, hey, I'm the professor and I've got money and you're the student and you don't have any money, so I'm better than you. And maybe a little of that in there, I may be unconscious of it. Those things will muddy the water a little bit. But the idea is I do it once, maybe the next time I do it, my intentions are pure, So it's always a ratio of good to bad. Okay? Ratio of good to bad. And when we get into Buddhism, we're going to talk about the influence of the mind in this. The mind becomes very important for this. Okay? In Hindus, the mind is less important. But for Buddhists, the mind is going to be really important in this. If you know your own mind and you really know your own intentions, and you'll be able to sort of take that into account to some degree. That makes sense. Yes?
So, how do you feel when people say like, oh, I did this because it's a good karma? Do you think that's kind of like a backhanded kind of thing?
I think it's good. I think anytime people try to do good things, whatever the intention, that eventually if you get in the, part of this too is habits. It's a little like behaviorism, right? You guys know about behaviorism? Behaviorism says that things that are reinforced you're more likely to do behaviors that are reinforced, right? So if I give her $100, but I'm doing it out of some selfish thing, well, it still gives me I still starting to develop the habit of giving money to people, helping people. And eventually maybe the habit will take over and I'll just want to start doing it and the negative part will die down. So I think in general it's pretty good. I mean, you could say this about a lot of rich people, right? This rich person, they gave a bunch of money to a charity, isn't that really nice? Well, they just did it because they wanted the tax write-off, right? How many of you guys have heard that? Steve Jobs gave money to, some cancer foundation, but it was only because he got a cancer himself, so there was a selfishness in there, or he wanted to get a tax write-off or something. Okay, but it was still a good deed, right? The results of that were good things. And so maybe over time, that good deed helps the person to, do more good
Sounds
deeds.
like less of a selfish motivation.
Yeah, even though the motivation initially is selfish. It's like the Alcoholics Anonymous people. Fake it till you make it. Give away money, pretend to be compassionate and help people until you actually start being compassionate and help people. Start seeing what your money really did help people. Maybe you see that you gave money to this cancer organization and they cured somebody of cancer that wasn't you, but boy, wasn't that a really fantastic thing, and you feel good about that. So I think from a Hindu perspective, that would be a way you might look at it. Yes?
So how would you define the mind difference between Buddhism and Hinduism?
Let me wait to get to that, because I don't want to muddy the conceptions at this point. There's a big difference between the way Buddhists and Hindus view us as individuals. And what I'll say now is that Hindus view us as permanent souls that transmigrate from life to life to life. Buddhists do not. Fundamentally, Buddhists do not. Even though on the surface it appears to be pretty the same. When it comes down to brass tacks, they don't view, there's not a permanent soul in Buddhism. And I'll talk about that. Okay?
But what I was trying to get at is how you said that Buddhists or people who practice Buddhism typically are more focused on developing of the mind, while Hindus weren't.
Yeah.
The question of this is, aren't they more focused on it if they also practice meditation as well as Buddhists? Is also the
Yes, yeah, sure. The Hindus practice meditation and quiet the mind. That's one of the practices they do. So the mind isn't completely unimportant. It's just not given the centrality of it is in Buddhism. And the reason for that has to do with this idea of Atman. Because for Hindus, the soul is permanent. And for Buddhists, that this idea that the feeling that the soul, that your individuality, your ego, whatever is permanent, is a fundamental mental misconception. And that in Buddhism, the act of meditation is to undo that misperception. As for in Hinduism, the idea is meditation, you quiet your mind, you'll do less bad karma, and you're more likely to get off the wheel. So the goal of it is different. Okay? It's a little bit different. Okay? Now, on the other hand, again, this is the average. Because on the other hand, you could be a Buddhist, and you could say, well, I'm a Hindu too. Because Hindus believe that Buddha was like the 9th or 10th incarnation of Vishnu. And so by worshiping the Buddha and following Buddhism, I'm just doing another kind of Hinduism. Because Hindus would believe that. And you probably, if you look around Hinduism, you'll find Hindus that probably deal more with the mind than other ones. So again, I'm taking the average of Hinduism, the sort of typical Hindu belief. You will find exceptions in Hinduism. So again, I'm looking at this sort of typical average thing, comparing it to Buddhism. Okay, so just want to be clear about that. Because as soon as I say that, you'll be able to find an example where Hindus just do mind control or something. They only care about the mind. Because I'm sure they're out there somewhere. Okay? So again, taking the typical average here. But the difference stems from this way they perceive the soul, this individual. And then for the Buddhist, that perception of a permanent Atman is a mental misconception, a deep mental misconception. And meditation, the primary goal of meditation is to undo that misperception. So the goal of meditation is different bent to it. Okay, even though the meditation, and if you see how Hindus meditate, you go look at on YouTube a Hindu meditation video, right? It's going to look a lot like Buddhist meditation, what they're having you do, and you sit and do all the same stuff, quiet the mind. Very similar. But the goal is slightly different. Okay, slightly different. Because the goal in Hinduism is not to realize the Atman is a mental a fake mental construct. Okay? They don't do that. As far as I know. Most of them don't. Okay? All right, so we've got this wonderful cycle here. This world we live in, this sort of consensus reality is called samsara. You may have heard this. It's also a name of perfume. So you can wear samsara, right? Put this perfume on. Well, quite rightly so, because what does samsara do? We're attracted to things. We like sensual pleasures in this world, all these kind of things that fool us, that keep us off this path, that make us do bad karma. So this cycle is full of all sorts of cravings and addictions, and because of that, the tendency to do bad karma and the tendency to be negative. And and so it creates a lot of suffering. So the idea is we eventually want to get off this because we, reduce suffering, right? And again, this birth, death thing, there's lots of suffering here, lots of attachment to people that you lose. A lot of the same things you see in Buddhism later on. We'll talk about those. So your karma propels this thing. Eventually you go around enough times, and lightning bolt, you go to moksha, you get salvation, freedom from the cycle. But for most of us, we reincarnate. We go here, we die, we get reborn again. Right before we're reborn, we experience what's called Vasnava, or Vasnava, and this is essentially like when you buy, anybody here buy a used computer? Or anybody here sell a computer? You have an old computer and you sell it or you give it away to somebody, what do you do with it? You wipe the hard drive clean, right? You get one of those programs, you say reformat the hard drive, it goes down, reformats the hard drive, it wipes it clean, right? Sometimes perhaps you get lazy, you just delete all the files and you give it to the person, right? But the files are actually still there and they can run a recovery program and some of those files will come up again, right? So sometimes it doesn't work completely well. There's a real way to do it. You can go and do it completely where you reformat the drive, wipe it clean, or you can do it where you just delete stuff and they're actually still there. They're just not like, you just really can't see them. Well, Vasnava is also this thing where this memory loss right before you're reborn. Sometimes, for most of us, it's like wiping the hard drive, by reformatting it. But for a few people, it's just like deleting the files, and guess what? They get reborn, and they can remember some of their past lives. Yes?
Does that have any indication to deja vu?
It could, perceivably, especially if it's among kids having deja vu. Actually, they've done some neuroscience stuff on deja vu, and they can actually see when your brain is having a deja vu experience. So I don't know but I don't know. I mean, conceptually, yes. But I mean, I'm talking about really remembering things. Not just like a feeling I've been here before, but like, oh, I've been here before at this date, and this happened, I knew these people, and there was this person in the house, and I had these things, and I lived in this room, and the house was painted this color. My mom's name was Carol. My dad was, Ken. I did this stuff. I had a bicycle with this kind of stuff on it. I had a sister, named Ann. I did, that kind of level of detail. And we have cases of that. Very, very interesting. Yes?
Yeah, isn't there a case of like a boy that remembered being a World War II pilot?
I'm going to show you that in just a minute. Okay. So why don't we take a break now, and I'll come back and we'll talk a little bit about reincarnation. Yes.
Little